afternoon, everyone. You're listening to CaMMVetsMedia on WVOX AM 1460 and around the world on WVOX.com. This is Jack Rippon with Ken Crazer bringing you this half-hour discussion of issues related to veterans and the active military. And now we're going to keep the mic right here. Ken will be joining us shortly, but we have some stories to discuss. We're going to talk about, let's start with what's happening in Ukraine. Over the weekend, Russia thwarted an attack by 20 Ukrainian drones targeting Moscow annexed Crimea overnight, Russian Defense Ministry said. Now, 14 drones were shot down by Russian air defenses, and a further 6 were jammed electronically, according to the ministry there. And the attempted drone and missile attacks follow 3 consecutive days of drone attacks on the Russian capital, Moscow. Firing drones at Russia more than for 17 months of the war has little apparent military value for Ukraine, but the strategy has served to unsettle Russians and bring home to them the conflict's consequences. Now, the Russian air defenses also shot down a couple of missiles as well, 2 Ukrainian missiles. Big update there from Russia and Ukraine.
Hey, Jack, thanks for starting up. Ken Crazer, CaMMVetsMedia. Yeah, you know what that reminds me of? It reminds what so many military historians is the Doolittle raid in 1942, when the U.S. Figured out how to launch B-25s off an aircraft carrier, basically Army bombers, as they were called at the time, and had little impact, but it caused Japan, the mission that against Japan at that time, caused Japan to increase its defenses and the resources applied. So I think the same principle applies here. The Russia now has to devote more resources to defense of its own territory.
Absolutely, and the Pentagon will provide Ukraine $200 million in weapons and ammunition to help sustain Kyiv's counteroffensive against Russia. Now, the latest package will include missiles from the high-ability artillery rocket systems. We talked about those on the show before. The Patriot air defense systems, munitions for howitzers and tanks, javelin rockets, mine-clearing equipment, 12 million rounds of small arms ammunition and demolition. So it's a big package there heading to Ukraine.
Yes, small arms, munitions. The other aspect is they're using up a lot of artillery shells. We're going to talk to Vietnam veteran about this, Bob Castelli, frequent guest on our show, former New York State Assemblyman, but a Vietnam veteran at an early age, 18 years old, in the U.S. Army, and talk a little bit about if the offensive by Ukraine is slowing due to the Russians being able to plant landmines, trenches, and then artillery. And then, as you mentioned, this drone warfare is just a new way to wage the fight. And I was reading this week about the challenge when you small drones, swarms of small drones coming in from multiple directions against a target. Very hard to defend.
Indeed, and so far the United States has provided more than over $40 billion in aid to Ukraine since the start of the invasion. But last week the Biden administration has asked Congress to provide more than $13 billion additionally in emergency defense aid to Ukraine and an additional $8 billion for humanitarian support through the end of the year, in another massive infusion of cash into what's happening in Ukraine. Now, the package request Thursday included $12 billion to replenish U.S. federal disaster funds at home after a deadly climate season of heat and storms, funds to bolster the enforcement of the southern border. But all told, the package is about $40 billion. So we'll have to see if
$40 billion.
$40 billion, yeah.
Now that's and what would that include? What period of time? That is that's about as much as was expected to be sent to Ukraine for a year.
Yeah, no, altogether since the start of the invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. has already sent over about $43 billion. So this, what the administration is asking for now from Congress, is another $40 billion.
So it's $43 billion over about a year and a half, plus an expectation of another $40 billion being needed over the next year or year and a half.
Yeah.
So that's going to go into the probably part of the new defense bill that needs to be signed by the end of September It's getting to be hearing from a lot of my military friends that they're concerned about the dreaded continuing resolution, which means they still can spend money, but they can't hire anybody, they can't start any new projects until a new formal budget is approved.
Indeed, and we talked about what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz with Iranian ships invading the commercial ships that go through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, a force of 100 Marines, newly trained by Navy personnel, stand ready to respond if ordered to provide armed security aboard foreign commercial ships transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Marines are members of the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit, special ops capable, embarked on the 3-ship Bataan Amphibious Ready Group. They were flown off the ships in Europe and arrived in Bahrain for training. Ship security teams and additional teams of sailors already deployed or stationed in the U.S. Central Command region were undergoing training. And the training began ahead of the August 6th arrival of the big deck amphibious assault ship USS Bataan and dock landing ship USS Carter Hall in Bahrain. The USS Mesa Verde, the 3rd ship of the Bataan ARG, remains in Europe.
What kind of ship is the Mesa Verde?
The Mesa Verde, it's LPD. So
it's another landing ship.
Yeah. And this is to train small teams with 15 to 19 Marines intended to thwart any move by Iran's maritime forces, notably its Islamic Revolutionary Guard or Navy, to harass, intercept, or siege the merchant vessels. And we talked about, there was a recent story where they tried to siege a ship that was going through the Strait of Hormuz, but then a U.S. Navy ship intervened and the Iranians backed off. So now we could see Marines on board some of these commercial ships protecting them from the Iranians.
Now, we may ask our guests about that principle, about why, generally speaking, you don't see that. You don't see armed guards on commercial merchant vessels. And we're going to ask Bob Castelli that because there's a whole set of law that applies to that.
Indeed. And going over to the Far East, to Taiwan, China sent Navy ships and large group of fighter jets towards Taiwan, continuing its military pressure on the island. Now, last week, Taiwan's defense ministry said the Chinese Liberation Army sent 33 warplanes and 6 Navy vessels between 6 a.m. Wednesday and 6 a.m. Thursday. The J-10 and J-16 fighter jets flew across the midline and to the southwest of Taiwan. There's a midline right in the middle of the Strait of Taiwan, separating China from Taiwan, and routinely these planes cross that line. But the defense ministry in Taiwan said it used land-based missile systems to track aircraft, 10 of which crossed that midline of the Taiwan Strait, as I was saying. So the Chinese continuing to kind of harass the island of Taiwan there. Yeah,
they're becoming more and more visible and aggressive towards Taiwan, and the U.S. is showing force by presence of the U.S. Navy sailing through the Taiwan Strait. But the Chinese are becoming more and more serious about their perspectives on Taiwan.
Indeed. And one story you might have been seeing all over the news lately is the devastating wildfires on the island of Maui in Hawaii. And the Pentagon has announced it sent a number of troops and military helicopters to Hawaii to aid in the search and to assist in the rescue and recovery efforts in the wake of the devastating wildfires. Saying that this was Brigadier General Pat Ryder saying that the National Guard has activated 134 National Guard personnel, 99 from the Army National Guard and 35 from the Air National Guard, to assist with a wide wildfire response. Now, the news comes as the same. Also, Ryder said that the Army and Navy have both sent several helicopters to the island to help with wildfire, with the firefighting, I should say. And the news comes at the same time as the U.S. Coast Guard announced that the crew of a 45-foot response boat, a medium crew, rescued 14 survivors from the Lahaina Harbor breakwall Tuesday evening. The survivors had to jump into the water to take shelter from the fire and smoke on Lahaina. And the AP was reporting that the wildfires on the Hawaiian island, fueled by strong winds from passing hurricane, have claimed 36 lives and have damaged at least 270 structures.
In Lahaina, I've heard the numbers are much bigger than that. As much as 100 people have lost their lives and thousands of buildings. It's just incredible to hear what the devastation is there. They said it happened so quick, and they ran out of water in the fire hydrants. and just the wind coming in off the ocean drove the flames that were in the brush, and just devastating pictures. They're glad to see the military is able to help. There's a big presence of the U.S. military, obviously, in the Pearl Harbor area, and I'm sure they were doing everything they could.
And in addition to that, a couple of Chinook helicopters, two from the Hawaiian Army National Guard and one from the Army's 25th Combat Aviation Brigade, are helping with firefighting with performing 58 total bucket drops in 5 hours, totaling more than 100,000 gallons of water dropped on the fire. So they're helping to put the fire out as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's too little, too late.
And the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer USS Carl Levin is in Hawaii. Now is in its home port of Pearl Harbor. That was built, the ship, in Maine and christened in Baltimore, but now it's in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. You've been listening to CaMMVetsMedia on WVOX AM 1460, heard around the world on WVOX.com. We'll be right back after this brief Fox News break, so stay tuned.
Just keep it on.
In the north end of New Rochelle,
Yeah, let's keep
you'll
it,
find an
that's
absolutely top-notch printer, one of the
So
very
Bob
best
Castelli
in
will
the
be
entire
calling in
county.
a second.
Minuteman Press
All right.
is known for its fine work far beyond the Sound Shore area. In fact, this particular Minuteman Press is certainly the class of the fleet when it comes to full-service community printing. Located just off North Avenue in New Rochelle, in the narrow Waikagill walkway across the parking lot from Acme, Minuteman Press is a terrific resource for individual and small to medium-sized companies who want something very special when it comes to printing. No matter how big or how small your needs, you'll get the skill and craftsmanship Minuteman is known for at very reasonable prices. From business cards to brochures, color copies, high-speed printing, individual booklets and flyers, it's Minuteman Press. Down that walkway when you're headed to Acme, offering quality printing at very good prices. Call Minuteman Press in New Rochelle, 914-576-0335. 914-576-0335.
Westchester's favorite morning show.
I love the morning show.
Okay,
Good morning,
we're coming back from
Westchester
commercial
with
break.
Dennis
I'm gonna
and
pass
Tom.
it to you right
Weekday
now.
mornings from 6 to 9.
No
Right here
problem.
on 1460 WVOX.
1460 WVOX.
Welcome back to CaMMVetsMedia on WVOX AM 1460, heard around the world on WVOX.com. A couple quick local stories. The battleship USS New Jersey, which if you haven't been there, it's a floating museum. The ship is in Camden, New Jersey, and it's a historic ship from
We have
World
Bob on the line.
World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War. It's going under some repairs and restoration, $5 million to dry dock. It's going to be towed to Philadelphia, the dry dock for the repairs, and then brought back to Camden. And in addition to that, here in New York City, the British Airways Concorde plane, which was on the USS Intrepid, part of the Intrepid Sea Air and Space Museum, is undergoing a few months of restoration. The plane was actually lowered onto a barge in the Hudson River, sailed down the Hudson River, around the tip of Manhattan and up the East River to go to the Brooklyn Naval Docks for repairs before, that's going to be a few months, and then it'll be brought back to the Intrepid Sea Air and Space Museum.
Yeah, I think on the New Jersey, they're not going to do that till next year. The curator does a wonderful job with videos, highly recommend it. And they said that's probably going to be a next year project for the New Jersey, but you have to maintain those historic vessels.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jack, a great job in your report. We've got on the line one of our friends, a Vietnam veteran, former New York State Assemblyman, a professor of both John Jay and Iona University and graduate of the Kennedy School of Government, 21 years with the New York State Police. Now, it's Bob Castelli. Bob, how are you today?
Fine, Ken. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for calling in. Wanted to get your view on a couple of things. Jack was just reporting the latest on the Ukraine-Russian war. And some of the reports I saw and read over the weekend was that the offensive by the Ukrainians is slowing down, that the Russians a set of defenses, including mines, trenches, and artillery, that's having some impact in slowing down the Ukrainians from advancing on their offensive. What do you see happening over there?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think we're all in support of the Ukrainian effort. They've done a great job doing what they've done, and I think at the onset of this, nobody ever thought that they would be able to push back the Russians, but that's exactly what they're doing. Now, having said that, the Russians have mined extensively. They've used all the weapons that were at their choice, minus a nuclear capability, and they've lost a tremendous amount of manpower. And as we've seen, the Ukrainians are now attacking some strategic points inside Russia itself, including the most recent one in Moscow, which was a military optics plant. So, kudos to the Ukrainians. Having said that, it's imperative, obviously, we continue to support their effort. It would be nice if they had the air power to continue the full court press, but without having done so, they've done a fabulous job.
Yeah, another report I read was that the Ukrainians have not entirely utilized what American tactics would be, something that was devised really in the fight in the Middle East when I went into Kuwait, was combined forces using infantry, artillery, armor, and air power, something that the U.S. devised. And we hear a lot about when we're at West Point and talking about the military joint forces. What's involved with that, and why does it work, and why is it maybe tough for the Ukrainians to utilize that kind of tactic?
Well, I think, in short, they do not have the weaponry, the manpower, the training, and all the logistical support necessary to do that as effectively as we would with the greatest military, on the planet right now. Having said that, what they've done has been done quite well with what they have, and again, their resources are relatively limited, and while we are certainly supporting them and other NATO countries are, they're getting stuff in there in dribs and drabs rather than in bunches necessary to turn around and take this to the fight as quickly and as effectively as they would like to.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we see Jack was just reporting on it was the impact of drone warfare. It's being used on a scale not seen before. And some of the accounts say that the small drones that actually are fielded in swarms and can attack a target from multiple directions are very hard to fight off. What do you see happening that's going to be kind of a new way to wage war? I mean, the U.S. Navy is very concerned about this, about drones attacking ships. What do you see the impact of drones being demonstrated?
I mean, drones have brought us to another level of warfare, and it's troublesome. It's troublesome both, I might add, on a military standpoint, on a foreign battlefield, but also here in the homeland relative to the potential for terrorist attacks. As we know, many people are able to have drones. Many people have drones. As they become more sophisticated and less expensive, the ability to arm those things become a lot easier. And again, it becomes a big problem. Now, on the battlefield, obviously, we see them being used with considerable effectiveness because the military technology is certainly far and above what's available to the civilian world. But it does become a game changer, because what you're doing is you are, in many ways, leveling the playing field when you don't have the massive artillery capability, for instance, that you might have, or the air power resources.
Absolutely. And another element that Russia has an advantage on, seemingly, is use of helicopters that can shoot missiles at ground positions. And the Ukraine's not having the same helicopters or air power, the F-16s, to fight off the Russian helicopters. Why is that another element of warfare that the Ukrainians have to deal with?
Well, I mean, as you know, and I harken back to my war in Vietnam, obviously the helicopter became something that was tremendously relied on. As you know, I was in the 1st Air Cavalry, so, we were the ones who were an entire division that was helicopter-borne at that point. And we used them with incredible effectiveness. In those days we had, Huey gunships and Cobra gunships. Now, of course, you've got an even better variety of those things. But that having been said, the Ukrainians do not have those or the capability to supply those at this juncture. And they are a powerful force against infantry, on the ground, because they're close air support items, not dissimilar to what our A-10 Warthogs were, which every infantryman loves,
I would think they should loan the Ukraine some A-10s. The Air Force has been trying to phase them out, but everybody sees that they're effective in supporting troops on the ground.
Yeah, the irony is, of course, the Air Force is trying to phase them out, and yet every infantryman, like myself, looked at these things and said, boy, this is a godsend. I wish that we had that available in my war. And it has been a tremendous value in both Iraq and Afghanistan.
Hey, Bob, I want to ask you a question. Jack was developing in one of his stories on defending merchant ships passing through the Red Sea and really going through the Persian Gulf. And proposals to add armed guards to those merchant ships, tankers, to help defend them as against harassment by the Iranians right now. What's involved with arming a civilian merchant ship? I know there's a whole body of law that applies to it.
Yeah, I mean, now let's look at it as a twofold process here, and they're both mutually exclusive. Typically, a lot of the merchant ships who are going past ports that are off Somalia, for instance, where we have tremendous sea piracy issues, are putting on cadres of individuals for security purposes there. Many of them former ex-military, special forces, Ranger SEALs, as shooters, because those ships are targets, as you know, of terrorist attacks from Somalia and other areas along that coast. So that becomes an issue. But when we're talking about arming ships, similar to what we did with merchant ships in the Second World War, now we're talking about arming these ships with artillery, with, sea-to-air capability defenses, which is a whole nother level of doing that. And now we start getting into the international rules of war, and that becomes somewhat muddied at this juncture. So, how they do it and what they do it, I'm not entirely up to date on, but it is a very different thing than putting a ground-based security force onto a ship to defend against a smaller terrorist-type attack.
Absolutely. Now, something I want to ask you about, as our listeners know, we've been waging about a 15-year battle. Not a battle, but it's a proposal to add names and update the chaplains' monuments at Arlington National Cemetery that are located on Section 2. And we actually had another meeting with the Arlington National Cemetery Advisory Board, the Honor and Explore Subcommittee. And the project received a 3-3 vote. One person was out or wasn't allowed to vote because I think they came in on electronic media. But we've been receiving a lot of objection to monuments that you have to add names to periodically. They call it a living memorial or a perpetual memorial. And we look at it, well, chaplains have been serving our country, and there was a precedent of names of chaplains from World War II added to the monuments, Catholic Memorial, honor chaplains from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and we're seeking to add 81 names to the monuments, including those who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And Bob, you and I were talking about how meaningful to you, a Vietnam veteran, is to have that monument, the Vietnam Memorial, present the names of over 50,000 Americans who died in service in Vietnam. Why is that so important to you?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was there at the dedication of it when Ronald Reagan spoke, and many Vietnam veterans were there. Originally, Maya Lin, who was the creator of the monument, who won the contest for the creation of the monument, didn't want the names on it. And Jan Scruggs, thankfully, was the moving force, a fellow Vietnam veteran, said, no, we want the names on there. And having done so, brought that monument to life. And as we know, it is the single most visited monument in all of Washington, D.C. Now, having said that, I understand where their thought is about a living monument, but I would hearken back to what I told you earlier today, which is I think they're doing the wrong thing for the right reason. Yes, it's important for it to be a living monument, but we're also talking about probably less than 220 names altogether versus the almost 59,000 names on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, which did work well and has been a source of, I will tell you, for me, great comfort when I visit the wall, touching the names of my fellow comrades who were lost with me in Vietnam. So, again, this is a classic case of a bureaucratic situation doing the wrong thing for the right reason. And I would hearken back to the fact that it was successful beyond any possible imagination with the Vietnam Veterans Memorial because we added the names, because we gave it life. And in order to give this monument life, they want it to be a living memorial, put the names on it.
Absolutely. Bob Castelli, thank you so much, and thank you for your service to our country as a member of the U.S. Army in Vietnam.
Thank you, Ken.
You've been listening to CaMMVetsMedia on WVOX 1460, heard around the world on WVOX.com. We thank today's special guest, former New York Assemblyman Bob Castelli. Remember to check out our Facebook pages, CaMMVetsMedia, Sea Services page, Ariana Basketball Report page, and our West Point Football Report page. And until next week, remember to thank a veteran.
New York State's most influential radio station, continuing the legacy of Bill O'Shaughnessy. 1460